walking, but one doesn't simply walk the 22 paths. One has to actually forge them. Well, it's more like making a path through a jungle or a bridge across a ravine, such things, or digging a tunnel. And that's a property of this, you know, the difference, the tension between all the Sephiroth. I wanted to do this because my Gebura video offered quite little pleasure, in a sense, which is apt to it. I wasn't intending to, but I was actually quite pleased that it was so severe and serious, and had a lot of warning in it, essentially, which, well, I think we can all admit that these aren't times to just be breezily freewheeling in every aspect of life. If there's one aspect of the tree that warrants some severity, is obviously Gebura, because it basically that's what it stands for. That's what it is. It's the police, in a sense, the prison, the punishment. It doesn't have to be entirely negative, but it's always carrying those. Well, it's the limiter. So it puts a stop to what's good. So it doesn't destroy what's good. It actually preserves what's good by putting a limit to it, so that it can, you know, sustain itself. So it's not the expansive, beautiful spiritual wealth of ideas that Keter or Da'at give, which are on the central axis, but there is still a lot of, an equal amount of magic is still implicit. So what I would like to do is go into the path from Bina to Gebura, because we've covered both Sephira as well here, just as we covered Chesed and Gebura both, so we could discuss the path. Well, I was discussing the path as I was discussing Gebura, but it was necessary to explain it in terms of the path I saw then. So this is, I think, where you get in the formative world. Because I didn't have this need from Chokmah to Bina necessarily, which is the Empress card. The path. Okay, so yeah, the paths are weirdly. So there are 22 paths. Look at the. Count them, and these correspond both to the Hebrew alphabet. Each path has a letter, Hebrew letter, in which I will not go because I'm not schooled. So the path from Gebura to Bina and vice versa is the CHARIOT, it's called, which crosses the abyss, and which is on the pillar of severity. So one might say it crosses the abyss with the consequences implicit of crossing the abyss. Now that if I build all the Sephirot, I will allow for pathworking, but because you will be able to identify with both a departure point and an arrival point, which is the Chokmah tension that one builds and works out through this, what I said, digging a tunnel or cutting through a jungle or swimming through the ocean, or which would mean like becoming kind of able to breathe under sea. You know, these paths always demand a change. You have to acquire a power that's my experience, to make the path. For example, a bridge across the ravine, you have to sort of conjure the means. And it takes all the energy. You know, pathworking is not something passive. You do it with closed eyes. But the first time I did it, and basically every time, but the first time I sort of didn't prepare for it. So after I was done, every piece of furniture in my room was smashed against the wall, and I was lying sort of half across a fallen chair, you know, completely relaxed with all my energy of fucking atomic energy expended. And when I went to there was a path between Netzach and Chod. So the first one I tried the tower card. So when I went out and I went somewhere with my bike, it was dusk and the street lights were going on, and I was as I was passing, they would shut off and shut on again. I had to go on again as I. past. At least this was the case on the Ten Sephiroth. So, where you have these kind of tungsten light type thing, lanterns for a week. But anyway, this what I'm saying is that you need this pathworking is pretty awesome. It's sort of the goal of I think of the tree for true occultists. It's not simply identifying with the Sephiroth is the first step, but then you need the next step, which is much more difficult. Having integrated a true understanding of all of them, I guess, you take two connected ones and through the instruments that the Kabbalic magical school offers, the method, the means that are available, you resolve that tension. But it means it's sort of like an extended version of the Ida and Pingala Nadi meditation, where you merge them into the Sushumna Nadi by first, completely manifesting through breath and prana the awareness of both the sun and the moon nadis. And then the difficult thing is holding them both in the concentration, both acutely present, not just concentrating on one thing but on two things at once, and then allowing them to fuse with what happens, complete whoosh of sort of cosmic mineral water tide, or complete cleansing of every aspect of consciousness and physiology or neurology. You don't need to do this very often. Once a couple of years, each few years is enough. I would say it's impossible to do this very often unless, because you even need these sort of your moon and sun side, your subconscious and more conscious, rational side, your day and night side. You kind of need them different in order to build up that tension in the first place. So it's kind of a waste to be constant in this yogic state, because it doesn't really explore the possibility of the tension, of the depth of the fusion of the being. Who's still recording yet? So then we get, so this is all sort of quite explanatory about why I'm having difficulty describing the path between Gevura and Bina, but it's renowned to be a dangerous path where one can burn up and just go insane or die. It's one of those paths you might compare to a young genius kid, 19, a guy too smart for his own good, a little bit maybe autistic, uses some mushrooms or some other drugs, and just gets this quite true visions of true illuminations, but then cannot integrate that with the lower world, and we call them Black Brothers of the Abyss, or that's what the Order of the Golden Dawn, I think, calls them. A scary name, and I've known quite a few of them. My generation is, I was born with a square between Uranus and Saturn, which is not, that's I think maybe the toughest square there is for generational aspect. It's grinding. You've actually, as Bina, and that's a square, so a tense aspect between Bina and Chokmah. So a tense aspect in supernal triad, so in sort of in God, one might say, from the mundane. Like my generation sort of has a conflicted God, if collective superego or whatever, and that is entirely true. Way too many of my generation people have committed suicide, or first where some of them were on medicines or even in institutions, and then they ended up dying or disappearing. Many. Percentage-wise, of the guys with IQs above 120, I would say half. It's just not cool. That was not nice. That period. Anyway, all of them tumbled into the abyss in a sense, because the abyss, where you have to go prematurely above the across the abyss in the sort of severity, subconscious neurological aspect of path working, or where you can attain in a certain age on acid or mushrooms, I suppose. is well, obviously, you know, the eye on top of the pyramid has the pyramid underneath it, right? It has this whole massive structure built by these enormous armies of workers and did the king's bidding. You can't just go to that top of the pyramid and say, oh yeah, I understand everything, now what? Yeah, now what? Exactly. What are you going to do when you understand everything? Because it's, and have nothing, because everything together compiled in the form of will to power is scary and not decent. So that fucks you up if you are there early with the expectation of attaining freedom. What you'll attain is a much intensely heightened sense of responsibility, feeling that of being partial to the fate of the world, whereas actually in fact you have not even power to control your own passions. So that kills young folks, and I think that is illustrated by there's the ancient myth about three guys riding the chariot, I think, and it's probably with Ezekiel's, and they die, vision also, that chariot must be related to it, but that's obviously a vision of a non-premature form of it, more like there is ultimately that possibility, something like that. The real reason I wanted to make this particular path is because I simply felt I had something to add to Gebura. Namely, it makes it even more boring or austere. What I said about Germany, that its method was silence, you know. After Hitler, they said, no, now we need to do the opposite of screaming and yelling, and stating out forthright our ruthless motivations. They have become no less ruthless, but they do so in silence. Their ruthlessness is silent, and silence. Every Sephira has a virtue ascribed to it, and Bina has silence ascribed to it as virtue. I never quite understood that. I mean, it's sort of intuitive, but I never had that satisfying grasp on it. Yeah, the whole world makes a lot more sense in that if you connect a virtue to a Sephira. But yeah, now I understand how silent. You know, so through the connection. Through silence, Bina, which is form and consistency, so building as Germany does very well, it feeds this Geburic aspect of what I said, that the enforcement of one's own realm and the war. See, this is where this is interesting, because this is where Gebura and Bina differ, even though they're also fundamentally kind of this, of the same spirit with the severity and limiting. Gebura actually needs to go about doing stuff, cutting off things and pressing them together, I guess, guarding this, destroying that. But Bina just, its being is enough for there to be limitation, so it feeds in silence into the heart of Gebura, I suppose. So I guess the heart of Rome, a Roman soldier, is very much described by the tie between Bina and Gebura. It's not a wild thing, even though the chariot suggests a wild thing, but in fact the chariot symbolizes the mastery of also the same thing I talked about, the night and the day, the sun and the moon energies, and thereby forging a very powerful path forward across the abyss thus. So it ties in together. So we might say that the path opposite kind of to the first polarity principle, Chokmah. Well, the first tension is between Keter and Chokmah, which is the fool. So that is entirely surrendering to just becoming the opposite. Just the journey as a being. Like one is something, and then there's the journey, which is the being, and then okay, there's the guy who has had the journey. Oh, we are the same, the Alpha and Omega. But the thing, the actual being, is the story. You know, the fool, the fool's errand is the life of the soul of the is the life, right? I would think that a person's soul might include a lot more, but certainly is not. It's only understandable in terms of its whole lifespan of the cycle, all these cycles in it, and the attainment, the biggest tension on arcs of will and love, biggest efforts, I suppose, of love throughout the life, including maybe the death, or the way at least one encountered it. Like a grandfather, you could see, is a mighty soul, the way he confronted sickness and death was there you could see that, okay, that's a complete being who is not concerned with feelings really, but just with leaving sort of intact the pride of the full being, even though, you know, everything withers away, but that's not the point. You hold on to this one big thing in which the whole family is included. You leave them with honor and no pity, especially no pity. He left no pity. Only idiots would pity him. Only the pitiful would pity him. Anyway, I went off on a tangential thingy there because of the fool's path, right? Okay, so I've covered. Now let me just. I'll cover quickly all the paths that are there. No, well, yes. The fool, the magician, the high priest. Okay, no, I can't do this actually. The magician goes from. Let me just stick to the supernal tribe. The magician goes from Ketep to Bina. So where the fool is the first thing that happens, and then in that dynamic being in itself, as an identity, as a self-identity. Because remember this, the spheres, the Sephiroth, are not beings. They're not subjective, they're not subjects. They are descriptions of states, gods in that sense. It's translated as, in the Bible as God, but in Genesis, in the Torah, in the whole Torah, there are many names for this God. I believe actually just exactly 10, namely all the names that are given to the Sephiroth. So there's actually 10 gods in the Old Testament, but they're all aspects of the one emanation, which is, well, you know, it's described in the veils of negative existence. So it's not really monotheism, actually. Judaism is actually both more like Zen and more like polytheism and pantheism than it is monotheistic. Actually, it's not at all monotheistic. It's just this one aspect of there's a few monadic god, like El Chesed is one monadic god, and Yahweh in Chokmah is one monadic god. But then actually Elohim, who is the first god in Genesis, who is described, who created heaven and earth, that's actually a female aspect, and plural, happens to be, I think. So, yeah, God is a little bit simplification. So, yeah, the path from Keter to Bina is obviously radically complicated because it goes from the sort of the innocent source, the unthinking, unconditioned source, directly into the pure conditionality of form. So it must be conjured, right? I think that's what the magician. It actually must be a supremely mercurial mind, able to grasp all the possibilities and all the consequences and draw the best one of them and make it happen. That's sort of entirely the opposite of fool, of more the one would have to have a lot of experience to do that. path between Chokmah and Bina is the EMPRESS, which is the path of fertility itself. Just the masculine, and the tension of the masculine and the feminine force and form itself is too vast and too delicious in a sense to go into it formally right now. That would need truly a lot of imagery and not just images, and that would be a challenge to portray the path. But in general, what I was saying, one might say the paths are beings, whereas the Sephiroth themselves are, well, it's not the path themselves are being, their states of, their subjective processes. One goes through from one state to the other, and that's what the human being is in this Kabbalistic philosophy. It's a human being is not a God form or a combination of God forms, but it's the process from God form to God form, and then building up from constantly doing those processes, building up a being in time, an organism, and a life, culture, a family, or any greater entity, a soul, right? That's what one builds in a formative world. And then the path, the first path downward that crosses the abyss directly from Keter is the second card. The third card is the High Priestess, which also is a card of black and white, the black cat and the white cat, the pillars. I forget their names. Kind of exactly the same as the chariot in a sense, but then in the form of not of a mysterious violence, but of just the inner mystery of self-sanctity, I guess. I would say the High Priestess is the first emanation of love. So she crosses Daath, right? She crosses through Daath. So there's that. So that's an important path. Maybe one could say that is from the initiates, from the sort of the spontaneous modern moon magic initiate perspective, that is maybe T-path that warns us about the possibility of this, maybe therefore also the attraction to Daath, because we are all, I think we are indeed, unlike the ancients, connected at this point also probably through this electronic network that binds us all together, and all the centuries of still spiritual repression and thereby pressure and development. We are probably a lot further along than the ancients, so it's possible that we have a connection to Keter. We just need to make the abyss bridgeable, I guess, and the High Priestess shall be our guide. I think we all know this. And that below that path is a path of moderation, art. It could be that it's said to be the boring, mundane thing one has to forge if once one has been awakened from the top. The path none of these boys I described were able or were willing to take. So the High Priestess connects Keter to Tiferet, beauty, which is the next Sephiroth I'm gonna describe. And for this end, it falls on this amulet that I bought in. It might very well be an original coin that I bought in Mycena. Let me say it in the home of the Achaioi, of Atreus, father of Agamemnon, the boss of Achilles. You know. So yeah, that. Anyway, this image very much is what one of the things I associate with Tiferet. But one associates the king. This is Alexander the Great. Whereas he's the ram, Alexander, so it's not the Leo, the Tiferet. Well, none of that is actually. It's not this. Ram is of course also okay in astrology. Ram Aries is the sun is in its exaltation, of course, because it's the sign of the entering of the sun into the weather. But it's so essentially I'm trying to walk path yes, I realize this video making is kind of a path walking, path forging